if there was a program, say, that we go and sold, the tractors were sold, and a warranty claim would come in, and they handled all the warranty at the branches. But then they were reimbursed by our department there at Charles City. And when they reimbursed them, they had to get a credit memo out, and I was in charge of doing that. And also worked in the publications area some did. And one thing had led to another. People would quit, or people would get a better job. Some of the people we had in the department were there temporarily. Aller was known for laying off people and hiring back for years there. And some of these people were supervisors in the plant. They didn't want to lay them off, so they dumped them on the service department to do things there, like write operators manuals and everything. Not everybody was fit to do that, but we did have some that did that. So anyway, I went way up into a technical writer, and then I was publications manager, and then I was assistant service manager, plant service manager. And then they came in with a bunch of people to straighten the department out. They didn't like it was run. And so I stayed there as assistant service manager for about 2 or 3 years. And then the service manager moved on. And then I ended up being plant service manager. And eventually they changed the organization, and we had central warranty and a bunch of other things. And I was involved with those, and so we ended up being general service manager of the entire product line. Later it was everything from chainsaws to Jacobson lawn tractors, and the new rotary combine we had that was really a good thing. Anyway, general service manager. There'll be questions later?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure I can match Max's experience, but I had gone to Iowa State after my Army experience, and I got my master's, and on a whim, I went up to Charles City because I heard they were looking for jobs in their engineering department. And I talked to the chief engineer, Ed Ketterling, and at the time he was telling me that they were going to move the engineering from Hopkins to Charles City, and this would have been in 1971 or so. And I thought, well, that sounds good, because at the time I thought that was a nice Iowa location. But by the time I started working for them, they had changed their mind. Engineering was in Hopkins. My first day, I was late getting to work because I was driving up from Ames to Minneapolis, and things came up. So I was about 6 hours late, and I was assigned to Lee Vaughn, and his project was putting the 585 engine into the Oliver drivetrain, the over-under and the 6-speed transmission. So I worked with Lee Vaughn to get those tractors online. The other fellow that joined me that day was Gary Bohall, and he was assigned to Mark Stickman, who was the project engineer for the articulated tractor, the 4150. And they had the V8 Caterpillar engine that went into that tractor. Gary stayed with White until I think they moved the engineering to Libertyville, Chicago area, and he then went to work for Steiger. And I stayed in touch with Gary and over the years, and I think the last couple of years ago, in one of his Christmas cards, he sent me a nice picture of a 4150 that he's restored into brand new condition. And so if you have any questions about those articulated tractors, get a hold of Gary Bohall or me, and I'll make sure get that information straight. You know, Max alluded to the fact that the plant had its ups and downs and was hiring and laying off periodically, and that was pretty much the story of my career with White Farm also. But I have to look back and say it was definitely the best working experience, the best people that I've ever worked with, and I look back on it with really fond memories. It was a really nice place. Hi, Ray. Glad you joined us.
Yeah, glad to be here. Aren't many of us left.
Ray Hendricks and I go back a long way. Back in fall of 1962, we had our first ag engineering class meeting. We were both freshmen, and I sat next to Ray Hendricks. And I think we finished that class, and then I think Ray may have changed majors or whatever, but we didn't see each other in any classes after that, but we got each other and say hi as we pass each other on the sidewalk on campus. And finally, when I moved back to Charles City area, started working with Ray again, and it's still a great experience. So, your turn, Ray.
What we're doing, Ray, is just giving a little biopsy or a history of our career with Oliver White Farm, why we came there, and some of the good times and bad times. I guess.
Well, I don't know why, I found it, my part there to be very interesting and a lot of fun. Like I say, John and I go back to 1962, mechanical drafting class together, in fact.
Can you hear him? Okay.
Can you?
No.
I worked for Max, after I got out of the Air Force. And, I was in the service department, started out as a tech writer. And after, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, one of the guys, quit and tech service rep, which is the job I really wanted. And one of them quit and went to work for Albert White Construction Equipment. And so I got promoted to tech service rep from there, and worked with Bill Buckendahl on the introduction of the closed center hydraulic system. And Bill and I worked together for a few years. I don't remember exactly how he was there, but he bought a dealership out in Nebraska. He was originally from Nebraska, and he went back home again and bought a dealership. And, you know, is Bill still out there, Max? Have you heard from him lately?
Max?
Man.
What's that?
Have you heard from Bill lately?
Dunkin'
He's
Donuts.
dead. He
Yeah.
died.
Is he still alive?
No, he had Alzheimer's. Passed away.
Oh,
I communicate with his wife every year.
That's too bad. Bill was a guy that, I remember when we were working up the troubleshooting procedures for the closed center hydraulic system, we broke something, I don't remember what it was. And the thing I remember most about Bill is well, education costs money no matter how you get it. I've had that happen to me several times since then. But Bill was a very knowledgeable guy, very dedicated to Oliver, bought an Oliver dealership. One time, he told me he had over 100 people for his dealership. I don't know how many, you know how many towns he was located in there? Have that many dealerships?
I gotta say something once more. My success at Oliver was because of Larry Jaden, this guy here, Hendricks, Dean Jaden. I had a lot of good people working for me. I didn't have that college education that they did, but somehow I got through it, and because of these people.
Max is one of the most honest guys I ever worked with. I had one other guy that came close to that, a Caterpillar, and that was just a few years ago, and he told me one time, he says, you know, coming to work just isn't fun anymore. And I agree with him 100%. Too many people in the business today that don't know what they're doing, and everything is about value engineering, instead of making Max a long time, which is what we did when we worked for Max, we went out and investigated the problems and brought up the recommendation for a solution back to engineering. Engineering kind of thought we were a bunch of nuisances, I guess, probably. But, some of them were happy to hear from us, and they had a genuine desire to make the product better. And I was there for the introduction of the 55 series tractors. And 1855 was kind of the beginnings of value engineering. And they had their problems. Most of them were fixed by coming out with an oil cooler, engine oil cooler, which the 1950T had from the very beginning, and probably one of the best tractors Oliver ever made. And the 1855 engine was a value engineered version of that. And we went out and looked at a few of them and a whole case. But there's still some of them engines running good in the 1800s, though. It's a matter of how hard you work them, I guess.
I can explain that hole in the engine.
You can?
Yeah, one of my projects was brought to our attention through the service department was that people were really fond of their 1855s, and they thought, I really should have that engine overhauled. And they take it into the shop and they completely overhaul it, and sometimes driving the tractor on the way home, you would throw a rod right through the engine block. And so after some evaluation and looking it over, we realized that the source of the rod cap screws had been changed, and they had found a more economical, more readily available cap screw that had a larger radius between the mechanics would torque these cap screws down to the specified torque, but it was riding on the edge of that radius and the fillet of the cap screw, which didn't take too many cycles, and it would wear, and then the rod cap was loose. The loose rod went right through the engine block. So we solved that problem simply by specifying and making sure that we bought the right rod cap screws, and that seemed to solve the problem. But I really felt sorry for the guys that were so proud of their tractor that they went and spent the money to have it fixed and have it blow up on them like that. So that's why there was holes in those engines you mentioned.
I didn't know, I never heard that story.
I must have not been back there that day. I don't remember that.
We kept it kind of quiet.
Nowadays, I'll tell you that. So anyway, after the closed center hydraulics and the 55 tractor program, and down the whole new fuel tank and several changes to the hydraulic lines, and I remember Ed Ketterling saying, we never had a problem with that tractor that would not have been discovered if we had just had more test time. And he was probably right. It was before the days of CAD/CAM and computer to assembly line, and we did have a pretty extensive test department, test program, including running tractors in the hands of customers down at Phoenix and proving ground down in Arizona. But of course, management was always anxious to start making money on the new products. We had to release them before many times people were ready. Now it seems to be the order of the day. Every 2 weeks I get an update for my computer programs, and after every one, something doesn't work right anymore.
Very true.
Yeah. That's part of living in the 21st century. So then, let's see, White Motor started, of course, the 55 series was still green, but they had a little white sticker on the hood. It said white up in the front before the yellow. I called it just lots of customers back in those days when I worked for Max. And one of them said, ever since that little white thing showed up in front there, it just don't seem to be as good as it used to be. And I've told several people that I think Monkey Newton only proved one thing, and that is Ford and GMC knew what they were doing when they passed him over for chairman of the board. He's probably, in my opinion, the worst thing that ever happened. But he wanted to move White Service Department and everything to Hopkins, Minnesota, combine it with Minneapolis, Moline. I just started building a new house, didn't want to abandon that, wasn't much more to it than baseball at that time, so I decided I probably didn't want to go and live in the Twin Cities. And so I left Max and the gang down there and went to work with John then in engineering for Gordy Bosco-John and Ed Gleason. And I think Gordy Bosco-John, one of these kids, must still be in town here. I see some things running on Facebook.
I didn't realize that.
Bill
Yeah, I
Bosco
didn't even
John.
know he had, pardon?
It's Bill Bosco John.
Yeah, I didn't even know Gordy had any kid.
Oh, you had a big bunch.
I remember they were tall, they played basketball.
Oh, yeah, they were, Gordy was pretty tall,
Yeah.
so they came by that naturally enough, yeah. And, worked as a liaison engineer for a couple of years and, with, in the engineering group, 4 guys, John and myself, and Ed Gleason and Gordy Bosco-John, and, then, there's another guy, I can't remember his name.
Oh,
I'll think about it.
Had to be Dean Barker.
no,
Then the service department never did leave Charles City. Well, yeah, they did, later, 93. They did move to Hopkins, they stayed for a while.
The last time was to Coldwater, Ohio.
Yeah.
Well, they went, I didn't even know they went to Coldwater, I knew they were in Liberty.
Well, not many of us went.
Yeah,
Libertyville back to Charles City, and then Charles City to Coldwater. Wasn't that how it went there?
yeah, I think that's right. That was, yeah, they were in Coldwater after I got another job working for Tremont. So, anyway, I went back to the service department for a while, and then I guess they decided to move to Libertyville. Then I went back to working with the engineering liaison group, and a guy by the name of Jerry Brand, who made all the experimental in the factory or in local machine shops where the new tractors passed away. And I got his job, and that was a very interesting job, being the first one to make the parts for all the new tractors. I spent a lot of time sitting across the desk from a guy by the name of Dick Bennett, listening to him. He was a metallurgist, one of the smartest guys that I think ever worked in the factory, as far as I was concerned. But he was very opinionated, and he chewed butt from everybody that was above him or got into the higher levels of management in the Oliver plant. And I guess he just was kind of merciful when it comes to their stupidity. And some of them kind of deserve it, I think. And I just think if he'd have just learned to keep his mouth shut, he could have been plant manager. But he didn't. He had to. Honesty he just had to be true to himself. But he was really a smart guy, and he knew all about what happened to a piece of iron when you heat it up red hot and stick it in cold water or oil or whatever. Plus, all the little alloys people put in with steel to make it stronger. And so that was a good job. But one day in March, I think it was March or April of 1985, they laid off the entire engineering department except for 2 guys. Oh, one other thing I got to do before that, I got to take 2 tractors to the infamous Nebraska test. That was kind of a farm boy's dream come true to participate in that. Kind of boring after you got out there. I heard all about it anyway, and it was a very interesting experience. And of course, the Nebraska test has gone by the way now; they don't even conduct it anymore. We used to have our Oliver salespeople said that Nebraska test was only good for two things. One, it proves that the state of Nebraska, and the other is that a tractor was there and was tested. And I guess somebody, state government of Nebraska decided that was probably true and they just continued that. But it was the, kind of the Bible of all tractors that you hadn't wanted to be sold in Nebraska had to be run there around the test track. So, then, in '85, they laid off the entire engineering department. And I didn't think that people who managed a company and did something like that were probably gonna be very successful. So I got another job selling door latches to Caterpillar, Case, and John Deere, and everybody who was in the construction industry and farm machinery business. Made a lot of friends there. Made the same mistake Dick Bennett made. I got myself fired. But my best customer hired me, so I guess, anything else you wanna hear?
No, it's interesting. Give it another chance.
Yeah, Hey, I didn't fall asleep.
Thank you.
You know, Johnny, that's Johnny over there, he's a welder, and, anyway, he's got more hair than I got. And he's older. And that makes me mad. So if the shine is too great, I will wear this hat, all right?
We'll let you know.
All right. All right, I started in 1962, young kid out of high school. I worked, it was in the fall of '62, and I started out on the assembly line. And, since I was kind of green and whatever, I got the pretty good size, I got the heavy job. I had to put the front ends on. And, it was, very labor intense, and I had to be real quick, and I finally got pretty fast, but we had a big problem. The problem was that there was a lot of guys, young guys on there at that time, and they had some shenanigans going on. It was greasing and, your hammer and all that kind of stuff. So just to put a little humor in this, we had a guy named Schmitty, which I think he's passed by now, so I can talk about him. He would grease and Permatex our hammers and whatever. We had a guy that was building up the bolsters. He was from Austin, Minnesota. And, before he went home, Schmitty went over there and he greased up his sleeve in his coat. Well, I saw him do it, so I told on him. Anyway, because I was sick of it myself, I had a hell of a time. I was green as grass, and I started to get handy up later on. But anyway, so Schmitty lived just across the street, so he went home for lunch. And so this kid, he put Permatex on top of Schmitty's hat. Schmitty was bald, and he went to the restroom to wash up, and then he used to come in, put his hat on and whatever. The Permatex dripped right down his nose. And he never come back, and I had to take care of his unit too. Oh, God. We had a little, we got it kind of ahead, but, by the next day, we were really far behind and had to work hard to catch up. But that's just one of the jobs my first job was. And then we started making 550s, which was, I had a center frame that I had to put in with the clutch and all that kind of stuff, and it was heavy. We had to do them at day, and that was all. I tell you, it was assholes and elbows. And it was tough. And then it evidently wasn't fast enough, because years later it was 105 a day. So, in the same job. But I got laid off that fall, or that spring, I think it was that spring. And I did another job, and I thought that I was going to go to the Navy, and I got rejected. I had gotten kidney infection from driving a truck, quarry truck, and, I was allergic to sulfa, so I went back to Oliver, they were hiring, and I got back in. So I count all the years from 62 to 93 as 31 years. I got back in as a shorty chaser on third shift. And Everett Richardson, third shift supervisor, and he was really rough. Anybody that knows him, he told it like it was. Anyway, I learned the job, and I did it for, I'd say a couple years. And Rich come up to me one day and he says, I think you should get some machining experience. He says, that would help you out a lot. So I went down to Division 4, I think it was, on the hydraulic line, and run a radial drill. And they waltzed me down there, and I looked at the toolbox there, and there was about 27 tools that I had to use. And I said, oh my God, how am I ever gonna do this? And the big man was kind of a gruffy fellow. And I worked with him for a while and got on my own, and I got pretty handy. And it turned out to be better than I expected. I could almost do it in my sleep. Well, there was a kind of a funny incident too. The guy in back of me, we were up at the time clock checking out on third shift, and I went to check out, and this guy reached around Woodard and goosed me, and I hit him in the chest, and he went down. And he went flat on his back, and we thought he was dead. And the guy that goosed me, he was running to his truck. He was scared as hell. Anyway, me and another guy hauled him in to the nurse's office, and she thought he was dead. She went and got the salts. She couldn't find a pulse. And she put it in front of his nose, and boom, he popped right back up. Well, the next night, third shift come, and I'm in the machine. Shortly after I was working, like Everett Richardson, he come down, he drove a fork truck because he didn't have very good legs. In fact, he had one iron one, if I remember right. And, well, he had one I know later on. Anyway, he drove the fork truck, he set it in the machine. He asked me, who did it? And I says, I don't know, Everett. And Rich, he called it. Anyway, and the guy that was in the machine back me was the guy that did it. And the beads of sweat on his, that big. That's the first time I ever lied. Anyway, got a good laugh out of it last time too. Anyway, so I got my machining experience, and later on, a production control job come up, and I was asked to do that. And I did that. I scheduled heat treat and automatic screw machines and all that kind of stuff. And then a few years later, while things got a little soft, I had to go back to work. And then this guy in heat treat, he was scheduling heat treat, and he had a nervous breakdown, and Lee Thompson come up to me and he says, you want to go on management? I said, well, I gotta eat, you know? And so he grabbed 3 lots of tractors that come in these computer type with the holes on the side, whatever. And off to heat treat he went. He threw him on the desk and he said, you are now the scheduler of heat treats. My heart went, oh my God. And I got through it. I had a lot of help. Wes Mattson was foreman, and Dick Bennett was the metallurgist, and Dick Bennett helped me out a lot. He gave me books, he sent me home with his books, And he says, read this chapter, read that chapter, read that chapter, you'll get an understanding of what's going on. And I did. And, I stayed there for quite a while, scheduling parts. There was, throughout my career there, I did go out on the road, a couple times. The hydraulic problem we had to fix all over the country. We had a hydraulic motor that run the power steering. What was that, was that a GM motor?
Saginaw.
Saginaw, okay, Saginaw, and we replaced it with the Charlene, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's an oily job, and we pick up tractors. In fact, I had one out in the field. I had to haul in. It was all covered with dirt. Had to wash it off and whatever. And a couple of guys, Dave Lilligraven, who was also Division 4 supervisor, was on the road with me. In Indiana for a while, and I had various other guys, and then I ended up doing it all by myself, and I had better luck with that. I didn't have to. I had one guy, he liked to stay in the tavern at night. If you get up in the morning and work all day, that wasn't my gig. But when it come down to the end, I'll get down to the end here. Make this a little bit shorter. The last, I think it was about 7 years that we didn't have a full-time metallurgist. And anyway, the last 7 years we had good lab people, and I got away with it. Had one incident that cost the company a lot of money, and I gotta say, I fought it. Most companies that I've been with since, run on a monthly basis. And they gotta have so much dollars out the door, whatever. And we were building mower bars for UID and Bush Hog. And we had these gears going to the furnace. Anyway, they had to be on the line the next day. And of course, we had a little trouble paying bills once in a while or getting the 4Gs in on time, so they were late. And of course, I had the certain pushes and whatever to make. And anyway, one of the supervisors come up to me, let's take the deep freeze and draw off the gears so we can get them to the grinder. And me and a guy named Jim Rezebeck, I won't mention the guy's name that made me do this, but anyway, he forced me into not putting the deep freeze and draw on, and ended up going to the grinder. Of course, I wrote this all down, and I had a Jim Rezebeck sign a piece of paper, and I had that time and everything on a piece of paper, and because I knew it was wrong. And so we sent it to the grinder, and they ground them, they run them on the gear roller and send it to the line. And they loaded them on the truck and put them in wood crates, put them on the truck, and they sent them to Kohler, Ohio to be finished assembled. And come to find out, all the nuts popped off. And so we went down the assembly line, walked down the assembly line, and they had opened up the door, and there was more of them with off. And I just found out that cost our company in the vicinity. I was told $100,000, but I was told by a guy that knows that was about a $400,000 thing. So that's one thing, politics in a company, when you don't have the power, sometimes it's like Dick Bennett. He told it the way it was. And that was, and sometimes you get bit on it. And I almost thought I was gonna get hung on it, but that piece of paper saved my ass. So I will say that. And I had a fairly good relationship with Ray Blanch. We fished the same waters. He actually moved to Decorah afterwards, about, 4 miles from me. He built a big house on a 160 acre farm, mostly woods, had 7 springs on it. We fished some of the same water, so, he ended up marrying, Mr. Sadler's ex-wife, and, I gotta say, we had a good relationship in that fact. Him and I, discussed a lot of things in the past. He thought the company was gonna go, I did too. We had 2 furnaces come from, I think, we dug a pit, pit 2 pits in Petrie. It was 10,000 a pit. They allowed me to brick it. I don't remember what that money was. I was allowed to replace trays, and which was very, very expensive in a lot of the furnaces. And it kind of led you to believe that you're going to be there for a long time. They sent us out to Chicago to 2 shows. Ray said, make a list of what you think you want. We were kind of animated compared to what was going on. You get out there, there's a 2 show, and man, you know, we should have been spending money on ourselves. If Oliver would have spent money on themselves instead of they using the money for other companies, we could have been outstanding. But when I went out there, we were way behind when it comes to machinery. And I think that and the landfill problem that we had for years, we dumped stuff up on the hill, the shaving pile. In fact, when I was a young man, I'd have to take a low slop bucket out and dump it up on that shaving pile with the forklift, the big forklift, and not knowing what I was doing, you know, who knew that was a bad deal. And I was in charge of plating tanks in the end, and we finally got OSHA, let it come in there, and they put in centrifuges, and we started doing things right, but it was too late. Talking about the lead pot, we had to hide that. But yeah, it was a charade. Ray and I talked about it a lot. I've visited him quite often since we were not too far apart. He's been at my house, I've been out at his house, and I helped his wife after Ray passed away. I was one of his pallbearers. And anyway, when his wife was out there all by herself, and she had broken her leg, and I had taken her to the hospital, and the haircuts and all that kind of stuff, and she just passed away here last year. So that's it. Had a lot of funny things that I could have probably expounded on, but I could be here all day.
I was gonna ask you if I could go before you, because I almost fell asleep.
You heard this once before.
My name's Russell Corniger. I live in Rockford. I was born in Rockford. I started at Oliver in 1961, and that was back when the company would, like, 5 years, it would start going down, and then the next 5 to 7 years it'd be up and go gangbusters. Well, anyway, I started, on a radial drill down in number 7, excuse me, on 3rd shift. Then I worked, mostly drills and mills and bowled down there and doing gear cases on the line. This is on 2nd and 3rd shift. And then, I got a letter that said that they wanted me, so in, 64, I, went down to Fort Leonard Wood and did my basic training, and then, well, one of the things when I did basic and was out of basic, this, 1-star general came through and he was inspecting everything, and he got to me and he says, Horniger, where'd you work? And I says, Oliver Corporation, Charles City. And he says, you know, that's a Cadillac of tractors. About all I could say, he tried shaking. Yes, sir. Then I, did my thing for 2 years. And, when I came back, I went back to work in number 1, running, tracer lathes. I was back at the 3rd shift, and at that time, they were running on machine operators. And I run anything from the OD grinders to mills, drills, tracer lathes, turret lathes, just about everything you can think of. And, then, about 10 years of that, and then I was asked to go on supervision, and I don't know why they would ask me, you know, I had no pedigree for education and stuff, but I went on, and, at first I was alone, and then, on 2nd shift, and then I got Don Bloom. He helped, he worked as a supervisor, and then we got another man in heat treat, and then there was a couple supervisors down in number 1 on 2nd and 3rd shift. And anyway, so eventually I pretty much had to go on 2nd shift because I had to make sure that the shipping, the trucks were already to ship out at 7 o'clock at night because they had to go to Coldwater. And that's about a 12-hour trip, for driving truck, and I made that route a lot of times, but not driving truck. So, like I said, I worked 10 years in the shop, then they asked me to go on management, and then the plant went down, and I worked, about, I think it was 5 years in Mason City building circuit boards. That was interesting. Then when Allied bought the place, they called, John, called me up and he wanted to know if I wanted to go to work for him back in Charles City, and I said, sure. So I had to quit up there, and when I came back, I was on my when I first started on 2nd, I had a scooter because they were running pretty slim on 2nd. And I'd have to go down to number 1, check on guys, and I'd up to number 7, heat treat and all this stuff. And I remember probably one of the first things that they told me, I said about heat treat. I said, I know nothing about heat treat. And they said, oh, don't worry about that. We got guys over there that know their stuff, okay? So they said, electricity goes off, just make sure that generator gets going, because I think it was the Edsel. If you didn't, get the electric up right away, you only had, how long did you have for a blow up?
Well, I tell you what, it got down to 1400 degrees, you started getting it. And it started to fall. And the GVRTs and the Edsel also, why,
it got to 1,300 and something, you gotta let it burn back. And if you get any oxygen in the back of the door, the GVRCs is the bomb. And I had an experience with that. Jim Rezebeck was starting up on Sunday night. And, when they started up, we used to run 3 weekends in a row, and then on the third weekend, we shut them down and burn them out and takes the soot out and all that kind of stuff. And that's, 3 weeks in a row was the most, the best way to run the department, because bringing them up to heat and taking them down all the time, and it wasn't a week to week type thing. So Jim was burning the furnace out, and it's gotta come through the first wall, and then there's gotta go through, when the wall of the furnace starts to burn, you get another nice firewall there, then you can slide the door down. It's on a big chain about this big around. And anyway, I was coming in on third, I was a supervisor there, and I was coming in in the morning, and third shift was about ready to go home. And, anyway, he, kind of lowered that door a little bit too early, and that door is about that thick, steel, and it's on a slide, and that thing blew up, and the fire come out of that and pushed him way back into a box, and he didn't have any hair on his eyelids. He's lucky he didn't burn his eyes, his face was red. But, heat treat was a place where you had to be exposed. I had a few experiences myself that didn't run, and believe it or not, I actually prayed that the electricity would come on.
Well,
The storms were hell.
yeah, especially at night when they came in, like I said, that's where I really learned how to pray out loud. Because when the lights went out, it was like pitch dark, you could not see nothing. And, I'd find my flashlight, and I'd be headed for heat treat, and then the lights would come on, and oh, thank you, Lord, you know. But anyway, all of them things that happened there, but, I'll try to fast forward a little bit here. When they decided to move the plant out, they were doing a lot of cleanup on second and third shift. They would empty files and all kinds of stuff. So Andy back was over to the supervisor there, and he had a lot of power. And I went back there one day, came in early, and I said, what are you gonna do with all these books and stuff? He said, well, we're gonna pitch them. I said, so they're fair game. If somebody wanted them, they could have them. Well, he said, I'll check. And the next day I checked with him, and he said, yeah, he said, if you want them, take them. Well, there's guys, they had a crew that come in on second shift, and they'd be dumping files and everything else. Well, I took all the folders and everything he had in his office, and I took it home. I still have it today. I don't know what's in there, but I know there's manuals on stuff from Cock Shut to Hart Car, all the way back to the early 1900s. And one of these days I'm gonna have to, I was coming over here and I opened this one box and I found 3 of my toy tractors in the bottom of this, the ones that were Spirit of Oliver. And I've got a whole bunch of the other ones that I bought and never sold or played with, or I had kids and they never played with them. I always bought something at the other store, you know. Anyway, so here I go to cold water. Well, they asked me if I'd go out there and help and set up the machine room and supervise. I said, yeah. So I went home. I asked my wife and 2 kids that were home, if you want to go cold water, we'll see, raise your hands, and they all raised their hands. next thing I know, we're out at Coldwater. And, I noticed right off, there's a little bit of difference between the people in Ohio and the people in Coldwater. And right out there, they wanted to make sure everything was right before they would release it. Well, they didn't have that luxury in Charles City. They wanted to get that stuff out, so sometimes they had to push stuff a little faster. Well, the product was good. No Olivers and the white and all that stuff, super good. And the machine operators in Charles City, when they came into work, they came into work. Well, the machine operators in Ohio, and they had some real good ones out there, but they just didn't move as fast as I thought they should, but what do you do? But they did a good job, okay? But, I enjoyed working out there because the people were good, but I still always kinda thought the operators I had in Charles City were better, you know? The people I thought were a little better. I hope there's no one here from Ohio. That's the way I saw it. Well, then, so then they came out with a deal where I thought they were gonna move the plant down to Heston. And they came out with a thing where if you was 55 years and had 30 years rights, you could retire. Well, I was 55 and I had 30 years in, so I took the early retirement. And, then I opened up, I took a year off and then I started up a durable medical equipment business and I ran that for about 15 years and then I got tired of working and sold everything, my house and stuff and moved back to Rockford. But I guess one thing, I hate to bring this, I don't hate to bring it up again, but I thought Charles City was probably one of the best places to work because of the people. And that was the big thing with me, the people. So, you got something else to say there, I'll bet.
Well, this guy over here, said something about Dick Bennett, and, he was a very smart man. And, I heard a little story about him. I wasn't right there when it happened, but, he looked like a comedian.
Which one? Let me tell about Dick Bennett.
Okay.
Okay, one thing about Dick Bennett, and back me up on this, when he came to work, it looked like he didn't shave that morning. And somebody asked him one time, he says, Dick, how come you're not clean shaven in the morning? He says, when I go home and get cleaned up, he says, I get cleaned up for my family. I don't get cleaned up for the workers here.
I would probably agree with that. That comedian, he looked like him.
Oh,
Come on.
come on, I'm 80 years old.
No, I'm 79. Anyway, he was at a tool show and this guy walked up. Come on, mind.
Don't worry about it, I'll think about it.
Oh, okay. Anyway, he walked up and wanted his autograph. And he gave it to him.
I don't know how you could forget that, you told me a month ago the same thing.
Well, maybe I should call it up on that, on the YouTube instead.
You want me to Google it? I know
Oh,
what you mean,
all right, it'll come up.
Well, I kind of forgot to mention when I was on before, that the thing I miss most about the Oliver plant, as I called it, 'cause that's what the neighbors all called it when I was in grade school, was the people that I worked with. starting with the service department, it was just like a big family. We had a picnic every year and once a year. I remember, Max's kids out there, Max had a son and a daughter. The daughter was a little older. And, she'd been doing something to the boy, picking on him, and he didn't think he was being treated very fairly, and he went and complained to their mother about it, and she says, well, you have to watch out for girls, they're kind of tricky, you know? And he says, yeah, but that's a lesson I've learned hundreds of times already. And everybody's kids were there, and they were having a good time, and we had some really interesting characters working there too in the service department. Some of them came from down from Minneapolis. We had Cal Overy. Those guys took them about a year to find a place to live down here. And he was one of them. He stayed in the motel during the week, went home every weekend. And he could drink a 6-pack of beer before he went to supper every night, and you'd never know he'd had a thing to drink. I've never seen a guy who had tolerate alcohol the way he did. And every time I'd go somewhere to take boundary shipping or go over to see what was going on the assembly line, he'd be a note on my telephone, call back BR 549. Never watched Hee-Haw, you know, that was one of your samples was always putting an ad down to call BR 549. And we had some interesting people in the field service organizations, which was my job, and the other 2 or 3 guys that had similar job descriptions was to support those guys and go out and visit with them and try to help them whenever we could. We had one up in Wisconsin named Ray Larson. He's the only guy I ever knew that tried to put 2 fuel injection pumps on a 310 engine. These guys were smart, so we had one out in Idaho. I spent a weekend in Idaho one time doing the vibration problems on 1750, and they just those guys always treated me real good when I was away from home. He was a Jeep driver. He had a Jeep Wagoneer, took a lot of pride in it, and took me up to Sun Valley where the Kennedys spent their vacations. And he let me drive his Jeep, and that was quite a compliment. He let me be supposed to act, and I did act appreciative of it. He kind of always reminded me of a German scientist. He had rimless glasses and a very precise individual. And we had these guys come in every year for a week at service school. Usually the week after Thanksgiving, and some would come up there in the cars from the south, and 20 below one of those 2 weeks, and the cars wouldn't start. I forgot I didn't finish your story about the guy in Wisconsin who put 2 injection pumps on a 310 diesel engine. He used to, at the sales demonstrations, he used to just love to get a hold of a 2255 4-wheel drive and follow a 4150 with it. And he just chased that thing till his tongue was hanging out. 2255. There's really some interesting people, and I miss that. Most of the other jobs I've had.
Hey.
Oh.
Down in Winters. And he looks exactly like him. And if you had the 2 guys side by side, you would know which one was which. Dean, do you have anything to add?
Go ahead,
Oh.
Max, you can.
Yeah, well, I got some stories, and I made a list, and one of the things that I thought about, someone here said something about they should add more tests on these tractors before they put them to the field. Well, we had a guy in our Chicago office, his name was Jim Wormley. He ended up being the president of our division, and he's really sharp, and you didn't fool with him, he just fire you, so you got a little bit of a problem. Anyway, he gets calls into the Chicago office. He told the operator then, give them all to me. I'll take care of it. So the phone rang at my desk and it was Gladys on the switchboard. And she says, it's Jim Wormley for you. And I know, Gladys, you better pray for me. And so he was on the phone. And he said, I just got a phone call from a lady that is really, really mad. She said her husband had talked her into buying a new tractor with air conditioning and pressurized cab and all this, so they wouldn't have to hire anybody to help them with their crops. That I could do it. She said, I agreed with that, okay. But you know what? We got that new tractor with air conditioning, and he got me plowing out here. First morning, we've had the tractor and working it, and she said it was hot and humid, and so the air conditioning was a good thing. So she got the air conditioner, and she made her around with her plow and come back, and when the wheel on the outer side dropped in the furrow, all the water from the evaporator came down, and she just had her hair fixed up. $15 hair came down and had dirt in it and coming and all over her. And she was mad when she talked to Mr. Wormley. And so he was mad when he talked to me. You've got to get somebody out there right away today. I told her it'd be fixed today. Well, we kind of knew what the problem was because we put together a kit, a piece of foam as long as the tray, and with this foam, why it was made such that the water, when it would slosh, it would just stay home and go to the drain tube. And so that was the fix for it. And she called verbally a second time after lunch sometime, I don't know when. And he called me and he says, haven't you got that man out there yet to fix that tractor? And I said, well, he had a 3-hour drive, and so he should be there about any time. So that was one of those things that when they was designing that air conditioning system, they should think that, should have thought about that tractor might not always be level, but they didn't. Somebody didn't anyway. And so that was a problem there. Another situation, maybe this is too long to tell you, but I guess I'll take my time and do it. I got a call from the chief engineer at that time, Robert Prunty. He said, we need you over mine right away. So I went over to the office, and this probably involved John as well. And he said that Moline shipped, I don't know, 100, 200 tractors of a new model to their distributor in South Africa. And these tractors are all overheating. And we looked into the files and we could not find any of the air to boil things to know what they expected. So Buddy said, I need to have somebody down there to run air to boil tests so that we can figure out what it's going to take to fix that. So he said I had to have to send 2 engineers because the oil hydraulics is overheating and the engine is overheating. But I can't spare them. We're working on this new tractor project, and I just can't spare them. He said, we've got a guy over there that worked for Minneapolis Moline. I know, and I think he knows all about this air to boil and could run these tests for me. Well, it worked for me. And so I said, well, we'll call Les and have him come over and see if you'll go to South Africa. So he came over and explained the situation. He was aware of it because he had a number of calls on it himself. I think it was a 1050 maybe, was it Moline? I don't know what it was. Anyway, it was built in Lake Street. So anyway, Les headed to South Africa. He had to fly to London and then somewhere in the northern Africa somewhere to fuel up again. And the pilot says, well, you can get out if you want. They got the food in there in the airport there and stretch your legs. So he thought I'd do that. I got out and stretched my legs. I started walking to the terminal, and here were all these guys with automatic weapons standing where he was going to go. And he turned around and went back in the plane. He says, I knew this was gonna be a tough trip. So they get down in South Africa, and this is a big distributor. They distribute Minneapolis Moline, they had irrigation, they had, I think it was, BMW cars, Zenith televisions, all this stuff was there. So they set him out in the shop, gave him a black mechanic to work with, and they was gonna run these tractors with all their instruments. I don't know what it takes to run an air to boil, but all the instruments on this thing, and the whistle blew, and it was time for break in the morning. So it was hot in there, and so Les goes over to the Coke machine, and he gets 2 Cokes, 1 Coke for himself and 1 for the black mechanic. So as soon as you go over there to give that there, the whistle blew again, and we're back to work. And the speaker up there says, well, Les Kudel, report to the general manager's office. He said, oh my goodness, what's the problem? So they went up with the foreman, went up with him where it was at, and said to him, he says, Mr. Kudel, you cannot buy these people food like that Coke or anything. They know where their place is, and it's not getting things from you, a white man. So he learned a lesson, but this was before that they fixed the blacks took over. So anyway, he went back and went to work again, and then the fasteners holding the sheet metal on were hot, and the mechanic dropped them on the floor. And the supervisor of the shop there come over, he carried a lanyard type thing, and he took and he hit the guy with one. Les told this foreman, he says, you didn't have to do that for me. I said, that's not the way we treat people. So we went back to the tractor, and what do you know? Mr. Kudel, would you report to the general manager's office? So he goes up to the general manager's office, and the guy said, I just talked to the vice president of export sales, that you're a troublemaker. And he said, tell us if he doesn't straighten up, he can find a new job. He will not be working for our company anymore. So Les went back down, and they finished the job, and they went back and got back to Charles City, and gave John, I think, probably, the information they needed, and so then they designed, it included a new radiator with more capacity, a new oil cooler, and I don't know what all, and they shipped a set of those parts to South Africa. Well, then they came back and says, we need somebody to install these and run these air to oil tests again. And so they called Les, what do you do this? He says, no way am I going back there. They said, okay, then I got a call from Doug Williams, my boss, and said, ask Les if I went with him, he would go back. And Les says, yes, he would. So we went back, and it saved I don't know, it was 100 or 200 tractors they'd shipped down there. They had to send all these kids for to make it. So that, yeah, Les learned a lesson about dealing with the people in the export. I've got one other little story. I got a bunch of them here, but I think this one was kind of funny too. There was a farmer I think it was in Dune, Iowa, Dutchman. And he had an 1850 with a Perkins engine in it. And he swore up and down there was something wrong with it, some kind of a problem, because the exhaust made a funny noise. So the guy from, service guy from Perkins went over there with me and Dwayne Starr, our service manager, and the manager and owner of the fuel injection place at Sioux City. And so we starts the tractor up, and sure enough, there was kind of, if it had been a 3208 cat, we didn't know that's the way it's supposed to be. But anyway, it made this noise. He says, that's the noise I'm talking about. Well, the guy from Perkins, or the CEV, I should say, he never saw a problem in his life for their products. And so he said to the farmer, he said, there's nothing wrong with that tractor. That's called an intermittent exhaust beat. And they all do that. And it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. And the old Dutch farmer says, yeah, I tell you what, I got another one over here in the barn that doesn't make that noise. Why don't you fix it then, if it's supposed to? So we proceeded to take the injection pump off his tractor. And the end of the story is, if you've got one of the last 500 1850s built, you had a much better engine than that tractor, because what they had to do is beef up the drive for the pump, because it was taking and doing a little bit business and so forth. So that's one of the things they had on those last 500. Another thing that they had on those last 500 was they put the intake manifold on one side of the engine and the exhaust on the other side. Because we had problems, both on the outside. The thing was full and full. There was a certified horsepower. It was certified at 92 horsepower, and after you run them a little way, it would be over 100. They were really that good. But anyway, that manifold would get hot, and you probably know the story. It caused the intake manifold to move and work the gaskets out underneath it. It would suck air, dirty air, and it would sand out the engine. So anyway, the old I don't know what whatever that guy, because it took a new drivetrain to take a new block. I don't know, but anyway, that was the situation. And you mentioned somewhat about injection pumps, the CAV injection pumps. We had a dealer in Wisconsin called the Turk. You ever hear of the Turk? Okay. And what he did, there was a two-man operation and his wife. And they would buy 100, 200 tractors all off the line. And he had them leased to the Green Giant Company. And with this lease, you know, they would run them maybe, I don't know, 300, 400 hours. And then he would have a sale when they bring them back. He would sell these tractors pretty cheap. And so, anyway, he had some of these tractors where the injection pump, there was a plate there that he'd adjust the rollers on, and that would break and it would poke a hole in the injection pump. And so he took a new injection pump to fix it. And so he'd order a new pump or have some, he finally had some on hand to take care of those. But he probably had 2-3 dozen of those do that, and that 200 tractors. So anyway, they fixed the injection pump, and then they sent it back to him. So here he's got on the shelf 20 injection pumps that he'll never use. Big inventory, $20,000. I don't know what it was, but it was a big inventory. And so I had to go out there with the Perkins service manager, Tom Stringer, and try to resolve this problem, because he had to send his only man to all the state of Wisconsin to change to injection pumps. And, he wanted his time for his man, and the mileage, and take his pumps back. He couldn't, he'd never use them. So Tom Stringer says, no, we're not taking any pumps back. That's part of the warranty. You've taken care of it, you've taken care of the customer, that's the important thing. And he said, I'm the customer, you're not taking care of me. And then he finally said, you son of a bitch, sir, you've got to do this, you've got to take it back. I thought that was pretty good, when he used his language like that, so. Anyway, he got his way, the injection pumps went back, and I think we supported him with some labor and everything, so he was happy, he was a good man. I got a whole bunch more, but I better not.
Well, thanks, guys. As I said before in the opening, you know, the reason I invited a lot of these guys is every one of them I had an experience with. My career, and I don't want to go on a long career, but started fresh out of college in 1974. Thanks to this gentleman here, he hired me. I worked in the service department for a while. My service trainees is what they hired. There's 4 of us young guys they hired. And we were to be exposed to all facets of the company in engineering, service department, sales, all that. We'd get shipped all over. Nebraska test, but, and then one of my first jobs was teaching this, service school on the Perkins engines when it came out on the 2105s. Daryl Hackbarth and I shared that responsibility.
Manual handling.
And then I was moved into working, I had the honor to work with Ray in the technical service department. And it was really an interesting blend of us guys. I loved that. Because Ray was the 55 series expert. He knew the hydraulic system inside and out. Les Q, Minneapolis, man. And if it was anything to do other than Minneapolis Moline, you knew that call was coming your way. When you hear him answer it, I got just the man for you. And they say, Ray, take this call, or Dean, take this. And then Bill Smerling, and correct me, Ray, did he come from Cletrac originally?
Yeah, I think he did, well, no, Bill
Where did he
Baumann
come
did.
from?
Bill Smerling actually came from the sales department. as far as I know.
He and Ed Cruz would set up all the shows.
Yeah, I got,
He had been an independent contractor before that, and he used the equipment and. knew all about
Okay.
it.
one of my experiences, well, I got sent out to set up a farm progress show with Bill Smerling. And it was down to Nevada or somewhere in that area. And I remember that like it was yesterday. Their set of laugh drove in the ground, and it said WFE on it. And that we set up the whole site. We were there for 3, and one of my most embarrassing moments, and I'm sure that got back to the home office.